When the bus driver eventually, he was not happy at all. I come onto the bus and he starts screaming in Mandarin at me, kind of expecting me to maybe know it, maybe because he thought I was a local.
It's not surprising to mistake Nishorgo for a local in Singapore. Although he was born in Bangladesh, he spent his entire life in London, UK. During his 4-month exchange student program in Singapore, he went on a food crawl, not bar crawl, got used to the Singaporean sense of humor and finally concluded which city is the best in the world, London or Singapore. I'm Max, entrepreneur and YouTuber. Let's get started.
How would you compare the average mindset of Singaporean versus person from the UK?
Both countries in the UK and Singapore have really important concept of hard work, like work hard, working hard, what that brings you, how important that is. But I think something that the UK has that maybe Singapore doesn't have as much, like in the UK there's a very popular phrase, work hard, play hard. So you spend half your day working, you spend the other half having fun, and you spend no time sleeping, right? Whereas in Singapore, it's you spend most of your time working and then sleeping, and then eating, right? So I think that's definitely a mindset difference I've noticed, that people aren't so concerned about just how to have fun. Again, it's not really a criticism of Singapore. I think it's quite admirable in a sense that they can just focus on what needs to get done, being as efficient as possible. And it's a testament to how Singapore has grown from like a third world country 50 years ago to one of the richest, highest GDP per capita countries, most productive countries in the world. And that's because of that mindset, right? Of we need to work hard to get to where we want to be. Whereas in the UK, I think because we're a bit more comfortable, I think people are a bit more entitled and comfortable in the UK. Whilst that culture of hard work is still there, I think a lot of us are also concerned outside of work, what do we do? You know, how do we have fun? How do we live our lives? I guess the balance would be finding something in the middle. If there was something in the middle of like UK's work really hard and then play just as hard compared to Singapore's work really hard and eat a lot in a hawker center, I think a middle ground there would be, I think, ideal. It would be perfect.
People say like, in Singapore is like more regulated, especially for students, and the UK is like more, let's say, freedom. And you feel like students are more crazy compared to here?
Definitely, I think London unis are way crazier and way just like, yeah, let me not speak about that on a YouTube video, I think in Singapore, people are much more studious, that's for sure. Yeah. Much more serious as well. But I think, yeah, like there are regulations in place in campus, for example, to not have alcohol on campus and stuff like that. Where in the UK, they will literally serve you alcohol in campus on social events, right? So it is very different in that sense. I think I don't perceive Singaporean unis to be that crazy, I guess. I think London definitely beats Singapore in that regard. But that's not to say I don't think Singaporean students don't have fun. 100% they do. But I think it is, if you ask the average Londoner what fun looks like in London, it probably is just different to what fun looks like in Singapore, I think.
Here, probably eating.
Yes. Yeah. I don't mind that. I'm a big foodie, so I love that. So it's been fun because, okay, like one distinction I can make, which is totally hilarious, right? In Singapore, a bunch of friends in my accommodation, they organized like a supper bus. And essentially we rented out a coach, 40 of us or so. We just went to, I think it was near Geylang, and we just went to a bunch of foodie places late at night for supper. And for anyone watching, supper in Singapore is the last meal you have before going to bed, which is different in the UK. It really confused me a lot. But it's the meal you have after dinner, which is very strange. Yeah. But anyways, so we kind of went round 2 different restaurants over the night. So like maybe 3 or 4 restaurants. In the UK, we have something very similar, but it's with alcohol, and it's called a pub crawl. Right? So, yeah, like you're familiar with it, right? Yeah. So I was telling my friends there, like, this is basically a food crawl. And I think it's such a good way to compare, you know, what the idea of fun is in the UK and Singapore. And I don't necessarily think like, you know, just going on pub crawls and that's the idea of fun and the UK is necessarily a good thing. But I think it does speak volumes about how the different nations, like, you know, pass their time and socialize.
Being like from the Bangladeshi like heritage, like background, like do you feel like more comfortable here or there, or it's the same?
I think that's something I expected. Would I be more comfortable in an Asian country, considering I am Bangladeshi? I thought that maybe being in an Asian country, I would sort of feel more at home. I don't know. But I think the country you grew up in definitely has so much more of an impact on you as a person and culturally than just a place you were born in and stayed for like 3 years or 4 years, right? Yeah. So it made me realize just how important home to me is in that sense. I think another thing I expected, maybe wrongly so, Singapore has like a large sort of culturally Indian peoples throughout Singapore. And Indian culture is not that different to Bangladeshi culture at all, right? We're neighbors. So I thought that maybe that would, make me feel way more at home in Singapore because of the similarity in culture. But I actually found that didn't really make much of a difference. I'm not too sure why. It was great having sort of Indian food, which again is very similar to Bengali food, in Singapore readily available. But to be honest, it's like that in the UK as well, right? So that, it wasn't much of a difference.
What about like socializing with students here? Was it like pretty smooth and easy for you?
Oh, I think this is, it's a tricky question, right? Because it's not in the sense that it was hard to socialize. I definitely did, and it was very easy to meet people, become friends with them. But I think on a sense of like a deeper level friendship, I think it was much harder doing that here than in the UK. I think there's a variety of reasons for it, and none of them are particularly bad. For example, everyone knows I'm an exchange and everyone knows I'm going to be gone in 4 months, right? To put in that effort to have like a really deep friendship, it's just not worth it for a lot of people, and I understand that completely. I think if I was in the same boots and the other way around, I'd probably think the same thing, right? But I think there are other factors as well. One thing I've noticed being away from home is just how, I guess, witty the average Brit can be compared to maybe people who are not from the UK. I found, I don't know, usually, I don't know if this sounds obnoxious, but usually I find it, pretty easy to, make a joke or two amongst people and make people laugh. Not here. It's a tough crowd, seemingly. And I think someone actually mentioned in one of your videos as well that the humor was very different.
Because you think like people, they don't appreciate humor or jokes?
I think the humor is perhaps different. I don't know if I can say that people don't appreciate the humor. I think the humor is just different. Whereas in the UK, I think the phrase often used is very tongue-in-cheek. It's very sarcastic.
Sarcastic, yeah,
right?
that's the word.
Yeah. Whereas I don't think it takes place in that same shape here. So if I am being really sarcastic to someone, I think I'm just met with a straight face. It's just like, what are you saying? As opposed to in the UK, I think most people would understand and sort of understand where I'm coming from. So I think most Brits do develop deeper friendships through humor. I guess not having that as an easy way, to socialize has also made it a bit more difficult. But that doesn't mean that, say, Singaporeans are unfriendly in any sort of way. They're very friendly people. It's just like on a deeper level of friendship, that has been harder just because of the circumstances that I came into the country with, not necessarily Singaporeans themselves, if that makes sense. I remember a Singaporean friend telling me that you're not a local until someone has shouted to you in Mandarin in Singapore, right? And I was like, okay, I don't know what that means, right? But I remember trying to go on a bus this one time, and the advertisements that are sometimes on the side of the bus that you have to change like every now and then. So these two people had come up in like a little small truck to change the advertisement on the side of the bus, but they parked up like in where the bus is meant to stop, like the designated area for the bus stop. When the bus driver eventually, he was not happy at all, right? So I come onto the bus and he starts screaming about the situation that's happening, about these two guys parking in the bus stop area in Mandarin at me, kind of expecting me to maybe know it, maybe because he thought I was a local. And I can't understand a word of Mandarin, right? So he's just screaming at me about it in Mandarin. I don't know what's going on. So I think in the most British way possible, I just went, sorry, and I just tapped my card on the card reader. And then he immediately realized like, oh, okay, he's not a local,
wrong guy,
right? Started speaking in English, started screaming at me about the situation in English after that, right?
Just switched.
He just switched totally. And then I was like, okay, I understand what he's complaining about now, but I can't do much about it. So I was like, yeah, no worries. And I just kind of went. And then there was like an elderly Chinese couple that came on after, and he immediately switched back to shouting in Mandarin about them after I went. So I remember after that thinking, oh wow, I guess I could tell my friend I've become a local now because someone shouted at me in Mandarin, right?
Is actually dating as a big part of student life here?
I am happily in a relationship, so I haven't dabbled my toes in the dating scene here. Yeah. But from what I've observed, I think dating is just more casual in the UK. I don't know, and again, it's not necessarily a bad or good thing. I think it's more just, from what I just see amongst people, there are just more couples in Singapore Whereas in the UK, you don't know what people are doing, if that makes sense. Like you don't know who's with someone or not. But I think like you just see a lot more couples in Singapore and around campus. So probably, I think dating is a big part. It's probably an even bigger part in Singapore because I think, I don't know, in my uni, most people don't want to be with someone in the same uni as them, which is really strange. I don't really know how that comes about. But in Singapore, I guess maybe you don't have any other options, so maybe that's part of it. But I very regularly see like couples around campus, and they definitely are in the same accommodation, even never mind the same uni. So probably is a bigger part here, I'd say. Yeah.
How's the cost of living for a student here and in London?
Yeah. I've always heard like this thing, oh, Singapore's so expensive. I don't see it. I really do not see why it's expensive, right? Yeah. I've seen Singapore be topped on the list of expensive cities past London at times, and I cannot understand it, okay? As a student, I have saved, by coming to NUS accommodation, compared to London accommodation, I've saved over £2,000 over the course of a year, which is like maybe like 5,000 Singaporean dollars, right? So first off, accommodation, I'm very lucky because I think if you go outside of uni, accommodation is the one thing in Singapore that might be a bit more expensive than London. But outside of accommodation, which I have, like I explained, luckily saved on, even food, just go to a hawker center, you know? If you don't go to a nice restaurant every night, then you're going to be able to get meals for like 5 Singaporean dollars or like 6 Singaporean dollars, which is like maybe 3 British pounds, right? And that's unheard of in the UK. The cheapest thing we have in the UK, if you've ever had this, you'll know, is like a Tesco meal deal, right? Which used to be £3. It's just a sandwich, a drink, and maybe like some crisps, right? Yeah. And here, for those same £3, you can get a whole meal, right? Like sit-down meal with a drink, with your friends in a hawker center and really enjoy yourself. And then other sort of costs, I think nightlife is way more expensive here, that's for sure. Alcohol is not that much cheaper in London, but it's a little bit, I think. But also like just getting into like maybe pubs or nightclubs and things, much more expensive in Singapore than it is in London. Transport is much cheaper, for sure. I think London public transport is fairly expensive, I think, for most people. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's extortionate, but I think it's fairly expensive. In terms of value for money as well, it's definitely much worse in London because you'll go onto a really cold, dirty bus, right? And you're paying triple the price that you'd pay for a clean, well, it's going to be warm, it's Singapore, a warm bus in Singapore with air conditioning, that's the plus here. So I think the value for money you get for public transport in London is a lot worse.
I interviewed the guy, he's a British guy, and he's a newcomer in Singapore, and he was saying, like, so you guys can watch it here, this one. So he was saying that being abroad, he understood more the cultural aspects of Britain.
Oh my God, yes.
When he was like first in Vietnam, he used to stay there, and then Singapore. Yeah. Like, what about you? What features did you discovered of yourself, like being British?
Compared to the UK, right, I am definitely not a big alcohol drinker at all. Like, I am probably in the bottom 5%, okay, in terms of drinking, because it's so big over there. But then here, I'm probably in the top 20%, right? Yeah. So that's something I realized, that people just don't socialize through that medium, which is not a bad thing at all. But that's something I realized that actually, something I thought that I wouldn't prefer, but it's something I think is a really chill way to just relax with someone, you know? Just having a drink with someone and just talking about whatever. It doesn't have to be a pub setting, any sort of setting. It's just quite nice and relaxing. Whereas I think that the medium here would be food, right? But then the tricky thing with socializing through food is you're eating. Like, I want to eat, right? Like, it's hard for me to like really talk in depth about something when I'm having like the most like amazing food in front of me.
Sipping laksa and chatting.
yeah. Like it's much harder because I just really want to enjoy my food sometimes, you know? So I think that's something I miss. I think just having a drink and talking is much more casual than eating and talking. It's not that football isn't talked about or as big here, but it's definitely not as big as the UK. Yeah. I think that's another medium I miss. Football is not like such a crazy thing over here. In England, everyone has a really basic understanding of the sort of dynamics between football teams. Like if I told you, let's say that you were an Arsenal fan and I was, God forbid, a Tottenham fan, right? We'd already be making jokes about how our teams are rivals, right? But like, you know, just building like a connection through that is obviously much harder here. So I didn't realize again how much of a fan I was of football in a global context than I actually am. Or the UK unis in general, you get a lot more people talking very actively about their careers, how they're going to, get that job that they want, what they're doing to get the sort of jobs they want, how they're building their skills outside of their academics. Whereas here it is purely academic. People aren't doing much outside of just studying, right? So I think that's one less thing that you can talk about, because here's something I wanted to do is get involved in societies that are relevant to the careers I wanted to get into.
Yeah.
But I very soon found out that they just don't really exist, right? So that was very surprising for me to see. So I think that's another medium at which I would usually make friendships and connect with people with, but I struggled a bit more to find here. Yeah.
What's your plan after the uni? Are you staying in the UK or you go somewhere else?
Yeah. I have every plan to sort of stay in the UK. I always regarded London as like the best city in the world, right? So one of the reasons I want to go on semester abroad is like kind of test that theory, right? Like, am I just kind of stuck in my little British bubble and that's why I think London's the best city in the world? Or is there something better? And out of all the cities in the world, if there was going to be one true like challenger or contestant for that spot in my head, it was going to be Singapore, right? My sort of working theory was, if I found Singapore to be way better than London, then maybe I could consider moving here for a few years. Maybe not permanently, just because, I don't know, I don't see myself sort of uprooting myself from the UK and coming here, but maybe for a few years and live a portion of my life here. But what I found is, I think if you wanted to compare London and Singapore, it just depends on who you are as a person. I think Singapore is objectively better in so many ways. But I think if you are particularly drawn to certain types of, artistic expressions, cultural sort of norms, then maybe London would fit your personality better. But I think, is Singapore safer? 100%, right? I think there's a misconception though about London in terms of, if you go to London, you're gonna get stabbed within 10 minutes. That's definitely not true. It is still a relatively safe city. Yes, there are problems, but I think Singapore is unique in the sense that it has become perfect in that way. Like, there's like no crime, which is astonishing. If you look past that, it's very normal for a big city to have crime, right? So I don't think London is faring that badly in that sense. Objectively, yes, Singapore's better in that sense. The way Singapore is planned out is better. I think one thing I found is architecture looks so much nicer in London because, it's like from the 1600s and it's so, elegant, right? Yeah. Whereas Singapore, maybe you get bored of the skyscrapers after a few months, like, another skyscraper, right? But the beauty in the architecture here is how it's planned out, how so many little things are considered, like the green spaces around here are so highly valued, right? How you're going to get around in terms of transport is so highly valued here. And how the architecture allows for that to take place, I think is really fascinating. So I think on an average basis, they're very similar in terms of quality of life, I think. Ultimately, your decision is going to be on your personality and where you fit in better. I think just for me personally, I would fit into London better, but I think a lot of people would fit into Singapore better. I have a friend from Singapore who's at my uni, who is now, he wants to work in London for the rest of his life. That's where he wants to be, right? Because his personality just so happened to fit London's lifestyle as opposed to Singapore's lifestyle. And he's a Singaporean, right? So I think, in terms of, are you going to face a drastic change in your quality of life if you come and live here? Probably not, as opposed to London. And it might be better in a lot of senses. But I think the big factor will be a cultural difference. So I think my plan is definitely to stay in London, just because I think my personality fits that better. And it's just obviously harder to uproot yourself and move halfway across the world, right?
What's your one most important principle in life that helps you in your, let's say, in your studying and your career?
This is something that my dad used to tell me a lot when I was younger, and I've really taken it on board. He used to always say, obviously your parents are going to encourage you to try and get the best grades and, do good in school. And sometimes as a kid, you're like, no, I don't want to revise, I don't want to do my homework. So my dad would always say, look, just, shoot for the stars and you might land on the moon, right? I think it's a really great analogy to have in life, to also not get disappointed if you're being a really ambitious person and you don't get exactly what you want. Try and get the best company for your role, try your absolute best, aim for that, if you don't get it, you're probably going to end up at a good company anyway, right? And you're not going to face like regret in life in that sense of, "Oh, I didn't try hard enough," right? So I think that's something my dad always used to tell me that I really have taken on board now. Like, you know, shoot for the stars and, you know, you might just end up on the moon. And
Yeah.
going to the moon is not that bad, eh? So
Yeah, that's a nice one.
yeah.
Elon Musk would be agree.
YouTube thinks this is the best video for you. If it's bad, it's not my fault. Blame YouTube, so go check it out.